Hello and welcome to episode 210 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the casual spike. My name is Shane, here in Denver, Colorado, and with me on the line from Chicago, Illinois, it's the one and only Godfather, Dave Harbarger.
It's me. I'm back on Hardwire. I hope I sound that much better now that I'm on Ethernet, baby. I'm coming to you.
Dave, how's that basement?
It's not as done as I'd like it to be, but it's enough that I can set up a folding table and use Ethernet again.
Do you have Ethernet jacks, or you just like have wired, like just wires throughout the basement?
I wired this like a library in 1998.
Perfect.
Ethernet jacks every 10 feet.
It's a 10 base T?
10 base T, yep.
You got that speed?
Well, we're going to do some LAN parties here. We're doing
Yes.
StarCraft. You guys are invited, so yeah.
I miss LAN parties in my friend's basement in like 99, 2000 era. But Devon, you ever been to a LAN party?
Does DreamHack count? There was a LAN party at DreamHack Dallas, right? Or there might have been one in Atlanta too.
Counts.
Definitely was.
So we have Devon O'Donnell, aka d00mwake. Welcome to the show. First time guest, well-known streamer, well-known player. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Like I was telling you guys in the beginning, I was basically listening every single week, and it's really good entertainment. So hoping I can. I'm not going to be as funny as you guys, but I'll do my best.
You can bring some information to our infotainment.
Right. And let's be honest, none of us are as funny as Stan. So it is what it is while he's on vacation, removing his life to a whole new place. So we'll be hearing from him soon.
So Devon, Mr. Doom. So I feel like there's a lot going on for you lately, and I want to give anyone who doesn't know who you are, maybe they don't watch Twitch, they're not they're not lost in the sauce of Magic content creation. What are you up to lately? What have you been doing? What are you making content about? Give us the whole 9 yards.
Well, as listeners may or may not know, I actually recently just quit my job to pursue streaming / content creation full time. Been doing that, for about a couple of weeks now. It's really just been a long time coming. When but right back around when COVID started, that was when I took the plunge first. Did that for about a year and a half, and then income was a little tight, so I went back to work. I basically, through the entire of last year, I did 8 to 5 and then streamed 5 to 10 every single day, basically, and it's not really sustainable. So, but yeah, the stream's been going great. A lot of support. I actually recently just did a 24-hour stream to celebrate the new set that came out. Played an absolute ton of brews over those 24 hours. I'm sure we'll probably talk about some of them, but yeah, I mean, it's I'm basically a full-time content creator, and couldn't be happier. I love it.
That's awesome to hear.
So listeners, please check Devon's stream out if you haven't seen it. Go check out his YouTube. He's uploading videos daily or every other day. There's a lot of content up there, I noticed lately. Go check his stream out. Longtime player. We've been looking at his deck list for years, basically ever since the show started. So please go check him out. Consider throwing him a sub. Help this guy live his dream.
Where can people find you, by the way? How do they spell your twitch.tv/
It's twitch.tv/ d00mwake. And it's the same on YouTube, Twitter. I don't have a Patreon yet, but I've been considering starting one. I've had a couple people ask me for like sideboard guides and things, so I might think of some tiers and eventually get a Patreon going. But right now, it's just Twitch and YouTube.
Sweet, awesome. Yeah, like Dave said, check it out. So on this week's show, we're going to be getting ready for Pro Tour Phyrexia. It's this weekend coming up in Philadelphia. The constructed format, of course, is Pioneer. It's the first time Pioneer is going to be featured on such a high level of competition. We're going to dive in to check on the meta, look at the recent Magic Online tournaments, might give us some clues on the kind of new decks that might be rearing their head up, and some brews of Doomwakes, and just all sorts of stuff that we are seeing, both established decks and new concepts, new cards that will likely have some kind of impact at the Pro Tour. And maybe if we have time, I don't know how that's going to happen. We might have some modern challenge breakdowns. There was like 4 different challenges this weekend, I think. And if we have time for that, we'll get to it. But you know how we go.
Including a showcase challenge or a challenge showcase or something to do with the mocks.
I don't even know what they're called. So
it's just an important one. That's what we know.
I look up what these are literally every time. It's like, okay, the showcase challenge, you have to have 40 QPs. But before we get into all the Pioneer stuff, let's do some really brief housekeeping because we got a lot of content. We have a new patron. I think it's a returning patron in Shank R. We have no increased tiers and no new reviews. We haven't had reviews for a minute out there, y'all. So if you have some thoughts about the podcast, head on over to Apple Podcasts. Maybe leave us a rating or a review. We appreciate those. Make us feel good about ourselves, maybe.
Yeah, only positive thoughts, please. Not just any thoughts, just positive ones. We want to keep those 5 stars rolling as long as we can.
No, I want constructive criticism.
I mean, I'll take criticism, but send that to our Gmail account instead. No, Apple doesn't need to know about the criticism. They don't need to know about the criticism. Devon.
Shane. And Dave.
You have a cough button.
What do you mean?
Like when you coughed a couple times, you're hitting a button. Are you muting yourself when you're coughing as well?
Yeah. Is it actually being muted?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's
it's
good.
Great. I'm just saying, this is amazing. I said this is one of the first guests who's put notes into our notes document. I mean, Sky has helped out with that too, but an actual tournament breakdown, Devon contributed.
This ain't my first rodeo.
Yeah. Right. And then a cough button. Devon is ready to go.
See, I like slide my little Audacity slider down to 0 so I can cough or something like that, or move my microphone. That's amateur hour.
I just cough over whenever Shane's talking. I just cough. And then I send a note to our editor about where he has to remove my coughs.
Listen for cough. Okay, we've got a Patreon. Devon, I imagine we'll have one in the future. Patreon.com/thedivedown helps support us, keep us going, gets you access to the Discord, and get some swag sent your way. We appreciate all you citizens of the Dive Down Nation out there. If you don't want to do the regular recurring payment thing, you can help us out by buying some merch from our merch store, thedivedown.com/store. Lots of cool stuff there. Dave, I saw one of your children in the Rhinos t-shirt that you sent, that photo. That was really awesome. Very cute.
Yes. If there are kids out there who want Rhino shirts, parents of young ones, send us an email. I can help you with it. We're not going to put that on the store, but it's not hard for us to make custom stuff. So, for what it's worth, even kids look good in a picture of Stan, Dave, and Shane riding on rhinos.
You can always, if you use Mana Traders, use manatraders.com. That's where we have rented our cards for like 4 years. The Dive Down 10 gets you 10% off your first 2 months there. Barrister and Man, of course, I think we're back to the ad drops. We're not going to do it. We're not going to make Devon listen to it, but we'll probably have an ad drop at some point in this episode. But you can use code TheDiveDown2023 for 15% off your first order of shaving, grooming, all that soap, all that kind of good stuff. And then, of course, if you want to buy some paper cards, Nerd Rage Gaming gives our listeners 8% off their order with the code DIVE8. DIVE8. So there's our housekeeping. It's done. Let's get into some content. We've got the Pioneer Pro Tour. On February 17th, the Pro Tour era is returning. We've got about 250 players entering the room, and they're all fully planning on winning the trophy at the end of the weekend. Devon, you're going to this, right?
I will be attending, but I will not be participating.
Oh, okay. You're not participating in the Pro Tour. Attending is good enough. Is it a DreamHack? Is it like another DreamHack event with the Pro Tour added, or is it somehow separate?
As far as I'm aware, it's not a DreamHack event. I think they're calling it a MagicCon. So it's, I think that's the official title of it.
Okay. The DreamHack was dope. We were all in Atlanta together. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was really rad to have, all the stuff going on around the Magic event. But I guess with the Pro Tour, you do want the Pro Tour to be the center focus.
Yeah, I think that it probably makes sense for them to have, when they're doing the Pro Tour, to have it at the MagicCon because it's more focused on Magic. But I agree. The DreamHacks, I've been to Dallas and Atlanta, and they were both incredible. Absolute blast.
Yeah.
I know there's a command zone, all that kind of stuff at this one. So 250 players. It is a lot like the old Pro Tours, right? Like it's extremely close to the same structure. It's going to be it's all tabletop. It's mixed limited and Pioneer in this case. We all know that it's rotating through other ones. What do you think, just as like top level, are you excited that we're returning to this level of competition for the way that the highest end works, Devon? Is that not something you're thinking about as well? Or kind of what's your mindset on Pro Tours in general right now?
I absolutely love it. I've played 3 Pro Tours before they changed it to the championships and all that stuff. It's something to aspire to. Back when, when I first qualified, when I qualified for my first Pro Tour, it was a surreal experience. I couldn't believe that it had happened. Just being able to now obviously it's a little bit different. Back then they paid for my flight to go to Valencia, and then a whole shebang there. But yeah, I think it's awesome. As a content creator, I don't want to focus too much on the pro aspect because I do still want to put content first. But I certainly wouldn't be unhappy to participate in one of these.
It sounds like us. not focusing on Pro Tour aspirations. Although, we do have Stanislav.
Shane, you finally given up on your Pro Tour aspirations. I'm so glad that you've come to terms
I was
with this.
going for Platt, but
as we all round into our mid-40s, you finally given up on the dream.
Honestly, if I could make an RC, that'd be sweet. That's all I really need.
That would be fun.
So if you've never seen a Pro Tour, you're in for a treat. I mean, you might not have been. You might have not seen one. Like, they haven't been around since like 2018. Until the end of 2018, they were held like 4 times a year. These locations spanning the globe. Like Devon said, you could be flown off to Valencia to compete with like 300, 400 other players. Always a split of like limited and constructed. Sometimes we got things like block constructed, or thankfully for us, modern. And then they did the whole like Mythic Championship change in 2019. Stuff got a little bit weird. Like some stuff was on Arena. There was no limited. Then they switched it again to the Players Tour, and that got a little bit weird. And then of course that was right when COVID happened. And so everything was online. Stuff happened that people were like not really understanding, not really caring that much about.
Yeah, so the one thing that I will say about the size of the event is they used to be about 400 to 450. So we're going to see a little bit of weird things in terms of records that make top 8. Typically in the past, it was about X and 4, maybe X3 and 1. But I think you might see some X and 5 sneak in there too.
Into the top 8?
I think so.
Wow.
Given the size of the event.
Someone
I think
at 10 and 5.
I think it might still be 15 rounds.
Okay.
As far as I'm aware. So
that's cool to know.
Yeah, that'll be wild. Yeah, that will be an interesting consideration. I mean, it's funny. Like, I see that as kind of a good thing potentially, because I remember it being like at the RCs, people were a little bit miffed where it's like, man, you basically like can't lose twice almost, you know what I mean? Because of the number of people and number of rounds. So I think it's good, especially at the Pro Tour size events where it's like, give people some latitude. They're playing against other amazing players. And so, yeah, sometimes you can spike the event and go X1, but more than likely you're going to lose more than once. And so early 2022 Pro Tour got announced. It's not the same as before, like we've been hinting at, but it's close enough, and we get to engage with it as casual and hardcore spikes. We get the RCQs, we get the RC events, give us something to aspire to. And these new PTs are happening 3 times a year, where people qualify out of the RCs, Magic Online, Arena events, and they get up to 500K in prizes, invites to the World Championships and things like that. And then, of course, the title of Pro Tour winner. And we're going to have our first Pro Tour winner in over 4 years after this event. And that's pretty awesome. Our formats are Phyrexia All Will Be One Draft and Pioneer Constructed. Like I said earlier, it's the first time Pioneer's featured as a Pro Tour format many years after it was announced. Like, we kind of expected that we would see Pioneer at Pro Tours, but with COVID and the shift of the whole structure, we just never had Pioneer on Arena. They weren't playing Magic Online events. They weren't doing like paper on camera or anything like that.
Yeah, and so just to kind of talk a little bit about what happens when these types of formats end up in a Pro Tour, right? If we remember what used to happen with Modern sometimes, when you would take a team like the Pantheon
Ultimate Guard
or Team Ultimate Guard or whatever, where they're like, okay, we're all going to get together in a house. We're all going to work on decks in this format that maybe has so many decks in it. People haven't really fully understood the dynamics, and we're going to get this brain trust together and we're going to break the format. And it happened sometimes with Modern. Devon, do you think that there's a chance? First off, have you heard about any of these teams or similar teams getting together to test for the event? Have you heard anything about that? I've seen some pictures of some kind of like players of old. I saw a team involving Reed Duke where there were 8 or 10 people posted themselves on Twitter. They were playing together. I'm not sure everybody who is in that room.
I think it was like Seth Manfield, Jim Davis, like a bunch of names.
Yeah, I think Ellie Cassis was there, I think. But
yeah,
do you think there are a lot of teams out there, or do you think that's more of an outlier now? And then also, do you think there's a chance someone is just going to break it?
As far as teams are concerned, I think I remember seeing it, but the similar things that you guys saw with, I think it was like Jim Davis who tweeted a photo, I think it was like him, Martin Juza, Siggy, Eli Cassis, maybe a couple other people. As far as other than that, I don't really, I'm not really up with some of the players in the Pro Tour. Like I'm close friends with Siggy, but that's about it. Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure in terms of like who's other teams. There's a couple of local players that are qualified who are teaming with some other players. As far as breaking it is concerned, I don't want to. We're going to get a little bit deeper into it later, but this new set is it's a lot. This new set is crazy. There's tons and tons of stuff that I think is potential, and I would not be surprised if somebody broke it.
Interesting. That's what we call a tease in the industry. Stay tuned for us to speculate about breaking it.
All right. So what I think a good starting point is just kind of getting an established idea of what the metagame has looked like recently. And this is all going to be sort of before Phyrexia All Will Be One, because we have Frank Karsten's article, his most recent metagame mentor article entitled, 10 surprising pioneer decks that can win Pro Tour Phyrexia. So not only we talked about kind of the decks that he called out as having potential upgrades from the one set, but we didn't get into the weeds on what he had been reporting has been going on with the metagame. And so I think this kind of gives us a good level set of where we were about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, this article is from February 2nd. So it's a couple weeks out of date by the end of this week. Who knows? I mean, there might be another article that comes out on Thursday, the same day that this podcast releases. We'll see. But I doubt that the overall meta will have changed that much, at least according to Frank's metrics, since they do take kind of a long view of what's going on in each format that he does. So why don't we dive into what he indicates is in the metagame right now and his weighted analysis, which is always interesting to see. So let's talk about it kind of in groups of threes. So there's 3 decks above 10% according to Frank's meta share analysis. And those are Mono Green Devotion at 12.3% on the way down a little bit in that meta share, Lotus Field Combo at 11.6% on the way up with that meta share, and then Rakdos mid-range at 10.8% on the way down.
10.8.
Yeah, that's one of the lowest numbers for both Mono Green and Rakdos that we've seen in a while, and clearly the highest number for Lotus Field in a long time. But what do we think about these 3 decks? I don't think we're too surprised that these are the top.
So for me, it's interesting to see like the double down arrow. I don't know if that's kind of like always being used where it's like, hey, this is extra down, but seeing Mono Green Devotion and Rakdos midrange take a hit. I mean, maybe that's likely metagame factors at work where maybe some people are saying, I'm coming for the throne. But Lotus Field growing all the way up to 11.6 is the real surprise here. And that indicates that, like we've been talking about, I think people are respecting both its power and understanding the deck more and being like, hey, I'm going to pilot this thing and let's just hope I have no bad matchups. But I'm curious, Devon, you're more in the weeds on Pioneer, and I'm sure you have played with and against these decks a number of times. Like, what's your perspective on the big 3, I guess we could call them, unless you're including Mono White Humans later on the list? Like, what's going on with these?
So I think the biggest reason for the resurgence in Lotus Field combo has to do with the fact that if you look at, we haven't looked at 4 and 5 yet, but Azorius Control and Celestia Auras, those are both incredibly favorable matchups for Lotus Field. So as those go up in popularity, then there's going to be a lot more people playing Lotus Field. Also, I tend to believe that Lotus has a good Rakdos matchup. I think that's the general consensus. So if Rakdos picks up in popularity, then it's not a surprise that Lotus Field is going up as well. The green versus Lotus matchup is very close. Depends on how many Besages Lotus the player has versus how many sideboard cards the Green Devotion player has, how often they draw Karn. But yeah, I think the biggest reason is that uptick in Azorius and Celestia and Ian Gruul as well at number 6, which those are all unbelievable matchups for Lotus Field.
They're just not fast enough. Like Azorius, we'll just go 4, 5, 6. Azorius Control at 9.2, Selesnya Angels at 9.2, big riser there, of course, too, and then Gruul Vehicles at 7. So we have like kind of 2 mid-rangey, go over the top creature decks, and then our control matchup, and none of them can just hang with the turn 4 potential of Lotus Field.
Yeah, the issue is they're not clocking fast enough. So Gruul, I think, specifically can because it has those Elf into Stormseeker draws. Like, I play a lot of Gruul. It's a bad matchup, but you still can win if you just have Elf, Stormseeker, Chariot. Like, it's hard for them to race that. But specifically Azorius Control, they're not... most of the control decks are not playing a lot of specifically dedicated hate cards for Lotus Field. You think, Damping Sphere and along those lines. But because the Lotus deck has a bunch of, like, tutors and 2-for-1s that... and especially tutor for Thought Distortion post board, the control deck doesn't really have a good answer to that. So I think that's the biggest reason.
Do you think they could? I mean, like, I'm sure we'll get into like these considerations later. But is Azorius Control or like an Azorius base control deck? Is that the kind of thing that they can could they figure out ways that like they're not hamstringing themselves too badly? But if they're going to see Lotus Field as 10% of the meta, I'm sure they're going to try to be prepared, right?
Yeah, I think for Azorius specifically, the biggest card, like if you're playing Azorius and you want to beat Lotus Field, the most important card I think is Narset's Reversal. That's one of the only cards that can actually get around bot distortion, and it's good at if you copy a Genesis or what's the Assault Ultimatum? Emergent, I think the Emergent Ultimatum.
Yeah.
You can copy that. There's plenty of stuff there, but I think that's probably the most important card. That and Narset.
What do you think's contributing to the rise of Angels so significantly?
So Angels specifically, it's weird. I think a lot of people thought that it had a good Rakdos matchup, but I've watched a couple of Misplaced Ginger streams, and he seems, the general consensus I think from the Rakdos players is that they're actually in fact favored against Angels. But I think part of it had to do with the resurgence of vehicles as well, because Angels is very good against vehicles. That I know that matchup is a nightmare. So that, and I think the Mono Green Devotion matchup is close-ish. The Angels deck can race. They can play a lot of good sideboard cards, but mostly it's, I think, with the small uptick in Gruul vehicles. And Pioneer is just generally like a lot about creature combat, and creature combat, there's not a lot that could beat 50 life,
Yeah. I'm sure I've heard that it stops mono white humans pretty darn convincingly as well. And so that's a deck I think a lot of people were considering one of the best decks in the format, if not the best.
Yeah, I mean, post the Energy Championship Series just 6 weeks or 4 weeks ago or so, most of the players in that field said that they thought that mono white was the best deck in Pioneer, and it's fallen way off since then. I guess maybe that is because of Selesnya getting bigger and some of the other things going on. But mono white is fast enough to beat Lotus, though, right? Like that's the deal, probably.
Yeah, they have a fast enough Goldfish and Thalia, so they have enough tools to beat them, I think.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about humans, which is next on our list, actually, 5.8%. That's kind of one of the decks I think we should take, a minute or two to talk about, because I feel like mono white humans has always been sort of lingering in like the tier 2 or tier 3 of representation of the format. We always, we don't see a ton of it, but it always is performing really well. And when we're looking at statistics from like Melee and things like that, what do you think it is about humans that makes it a particularly good or potentially dangerous choice for something like the Pro Tour? Like, why is it always hovering maybe around 6?
If you look at, 1 through 6, and just look at down the matchup. So you have Mono Green Devotion, which I think a lot of the white players maybe thought they were favored before, but is actually the matchup is a little bit closer. Lotus Field is slightly favorable, and then the next 4 are just Rakdos, Azorius, Selesnya, Angels, and Gruul vehicles, which are all just disastrous matchups for mono white. So I think it gotten to the point where I think it was decent against Phoenix before, but as Phoenix fell off, it kind of, you know what I mean? It's doesn't really have that many good matchups anymore if you look at the rest of the top of the metagame.
It's interesting. We might as well talk. We'll come back to number 8 in a second. But speaking of Phoenix is all the way down here at number 9 now, after being one of the most, definitely in the top tier at the time of the RCs. Do you think that that's all because of Selesnya Angels coming to the top of the list, or what do you think is going on?
And Lotus Field.
Lotus Field.
But
yeah. That's
it
definitely
just can't hang with that.
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest contributor to that. Is Phoenix is basically 0% against Lotus Field. We saw that matchup a couple of times at the RC. So as Lotus Field, significantly increases up to almost 12%, then Phoenix has to go down with it because it just has no chance against it.
R.I.P. Birds again. I'm sure they'll be back
at some
someday.
point.
Yeah, someday.
They do come back from the graveyard. So
yeah, exactly. Set and Spike. Good job. The other decks that are here in the top 10 that we have Rakdos Sacrifice, and then we have Obzon Greasefang, and then maybe we'll draw a line under those for a second. So Sacrifice is on the way up. This is another deck that sort of eludes me as to why it sort of bubbles between 12th place and 8th place in these meta rankings. It's like occasionally it pops up and wins a challenge or something like that. It's always been a deck that's been decent in Pioneer for the most part. What do you think is going on with this deck? Is this one to keep an eye on, or is this just kind of relegated to tier 1.5 basically down here?
I mean, it's a good deck. I think it has decent matchups against some of what we're looking at here, specifically Rakdos midrange, Gruul vehicles, Selesnya Angels, mono white humans. The biggest issue with Sacrifice is the mono green matchup is pretty sketchy. With access to 4 the Great Creator, being able to shut off Witch's Oven, because Claim the Firstborn, Witch's Oven is part of your best plan against them. So when they have Karn, it's pretty tough to win. But I think it ends up being a metagame call. If you expect a lot of mono green, you probably don't want to play. You want to avoid Rakdos Sacrifice. But if you expect maybe more Rakdos, Gruul, Selesnya, then it's a good choice.
Yeah, and then finally we have Greasefang. The combo the frustrating to play against combo deck that is continually threatening to break through via different enablers. Still just kind of here, probably staying here right now.
Yeah, it kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes you'll see it do well in a challenge. I think the way that I look at Greasefang is it's either you either die on turn 3 or you do absolutely nothing, and it's just a lot of people don't like that type of variance. So
yeah. Yeah, I think there's some sleepers on the rest of Frank's list here, so maybe we'll come back to them a little bit later. But what do we think about this looking like the established metagame? I feel like there's not really any new decks on this list but there are decks changing positions. But in a lot of ways, this is just pioneer of the last 6 or 7 months.
I think the thing that pokes out to me the most here is that we did have the ability for not an entirely new deck, but something like Selesnya Angels to so quickly creep up the ranks and become like a 9.2% of the competitive meta. I think does speak to the ability for people to still metagame in the Pioneer environment, and that's even before we had Phyrexia All Will Be One. Additionally, of course, we watched vehicles kind of go from, oh, this is an interesting thing that happened at like an RC to a top 6 deck. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for things like this to happen.
it's really funny with vehicles specifically, as you mentioned. We didn't really see much of it before the RC. It did well at the RC, and then it's just like it's all over the place. It's that was basically a deck that was spawned at the RC, very similar to Angels.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you look at this list, you start to see the pillars of the format stand out just on card power too. So we have our Nykthos deck, we have our Lotus Field deck, we have our Thoughtseize deck, we have our blue-white good cards deck, we have our Coco deck, we have our Sky Sovereign deck, we have our Thalia deck. It just kind of goes down the list in that way. So it feels like there's not a huge amount of overlap between the cards that go into these decks. I feel like, which is kind of nice. It's not like Modern in the sense where, Modern is, much maligned. You got to play a lot of Modern Horizons 2 cards. The constellation of Ragavan decks, there's 8 different Ragavan decks that you play that are different decks, but they all have Ragavan. This meta is pretty varied from deck to deck, but like you said, the thing that combines all of them is the format's kind of reliance on creature combat in many different ways, and that's kind of the thing that sets the context for everything that goes on.
Yeah, I think if you look at maybe the top 10 or top 15, I think the only most common denominator between some of these decks is Bone Crusher Giant. But as you mentioned, because the format is so creature-based, that is one of the best possible cards you can have against a creature deck. Like, it's just always going to be a 2-for-1. So
yeah, and then the other card too, of course, is Fable that people like to point out as well. That's in a lot of these. So those red kind of mid-rangey cards are all over the place here too. So my question when we look at this kind of is, okay, if this is the high end, before we get into our sleepers, before we get into new cards from one, when you think about a Pro Tour, when we think about this version of a Pro Tour, do we think that this metagame is going to get more polarized in a room full of 250 people, or do we think it's going to be about the same? Because part of me wonders is, the thing that used to happen with the old Pro Tour sometimes is it would be like 100 people show up with Splinter Twin. And then you're kind of like, whoa, in a normal tournament, that was like 10% of the meta. In a Pro Tour, it was 25% of the meta. Do we think that can happen here? Because it did happen a little bit in the RCs where we were seeing a pretty diverse metagame, and then all of a sudden it was like Mono Green Devotion and Rakdos Midrange were like 20% of the RCs, right? What do you think? Do you think that's going to happen here, or?
Don't think we're going to have PT Eldrazi again. I think mostly somebody asked me this on stream today. What would my prediction for top 3? And I think I said 20% Rakdos, 20% Rakdos, 10 to 15% Lotus, and 10 to 15% Mono Green. And I think Rakdos still will be the highest played deck. And I think the top 3 will stay the same, but I think there'll just be some small shifts.
We're going to talk about this as we go through these challenges in the very near future, but do you think there's like a big opportunity for shakeups to happen as well? Like, I mean, I know like Dave was talking about consolidation, but I'm particularly interested in like, are people going to discover something not necessarily broken, but either big shifts to existing archetypes, or perhaps even like a sleeper archetype that, will potentially be something like 10% of the meta?
Yeah, we kind of saw this a little bit with the challenge. There was a challenge right before one that was won by Xbox Greg. A local friend of mine, Ben, and he won with Elves. And one of the things that we were talking about is there's been some upgrades to Elves. But at the end of the day, me and him both kind of talked about it, and we were like, yeah, we don't actually kind of like these new cards, which I thought was kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, we've seen some innovations on some of these decks. Like we've seen Rakdos incorporating some lands, boats. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think for the most part, as far as the established decks are concerned, they're just getting some minor upgrades, maybe not too much in terms of the way of actually shifting the way their deck functions. But yeah, I think for the most part, it's going to be pretty much what we see here, I think.
All right.
All right, so let's take a look at some challenges to talk about the minor upgrades that some of these decks are having. Let's start with the Saturday 211 challenge, since the showcase challenge had some people that built off of the decks that they saw in the 211 challenge. So, and of course, this one won by Derek Misplaced Ginger on Rakdos Midrange.
Shocker.
Yeah, shocker. I mean, the guy has just been playing the deck forever, playing it through all the times where people made fun of it, said it was a bad deck, believed it the whole time as it was coming together, and then has just shown people, like, as the sets have come out, as time has gone on, really a lot of the way to meta this deck, to play this deck, and just really stick with it.
Do you think this speaks more to the quality of Rakdos midrange or the quality of Misplaced Ginger? Or a little bit of each?
I would say a little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, we know Derek, because Derek's a major grinder, back since the face-to-face, era in Canada and things like that, so.
Nothing new in it. Like, there's no new cards in this particular deck. It would have been still a little bit early for new cards over this weekend. Not super early, because people were definitely getting a hold of them. But, this is just your kind of standard. It's got 3 Shieldred at the top end. It's got all the cards that you would imagine in the creature suite. It does have a Liliana main.
Forgetting about Blackcleave Cliffs, are we?
Oh, yes. That is a huge... I mean...
How could you?
Okay. Great point, because I think that we pretty much said, when we were doing the spoiler episodes, we were kind of like, these cards are going to make a huge difference in Pioneer for a bunch of decks that can play them. How big of an upgrade is Blackleaf Cliffs just for Rakdos midrange on its own, do you think?
Well, I was mostly just joking. I think that the mana in Rakdos was already kind of fine. You'll see Ginger only played 3 copies,
right?
And I think you could. The thing about the Rakdos deck is it has a lot of ways to use its mana. So playing a bunch of copies is kind of awkward, especially if you have Shieldred on turn 4 or Activate Den. So you don't want to play a ton, but I mean, it's a slight upgrade for sure.
So, but that is really the only new card in this particular list. Although we are running some other, new interesting sideboard cards. We're running Ritual of Suit. That wasn't here at least a few months ago. It wasn't around. We're running 3 Extinction Event. That goes up and down. We've got 4 Reckoner Bankbusters in the 75, 2 main, 2 sideboard. That card has taken a little while to get adopted as a 4 of in this deck, and not everybody still doesn't play it in that quantity. Power Word Kill seems to be one of the removal cards of choice right now, and that has bounced around as you kind of think about how to build out your removal suite beyond Dreadbore. And there's a Liliana main, which is one of the first times I've seen a Liliana in Rakdos in a minute. Surprisingly, I don't know. I was when that card was spoiled, I was like, wow, it's gonna be a 4 of in Pioneer, and then it just is not. So, but this is Rakdos, right? And congrats to Derek for winning. Certainly deserved it. Second place, we had RE. What's Ari's last name?
Ari Zax.
Zax. Yeah, Ari Zax. In second place on Mono Green Devotion. Here's my question about this list. This list is the one that has Nicol Bolas Dragon God as a single copy, which harkens back to where Mono Green Devotion was, 6 months ago, last summer, essentially. And doesn't really have too many. I mean, it has upgrades from over time from that time period, but that's still the most interesting thing to me, is that we're back to this one and we're away from the Teferi Infinite combo. The Cauldron is not here in the sideboard. Oh no, there it is. There's Pestilent Cauldron. So how did Nicol Bolas get back in this deck, and why do you think?
So I think there's 2 main big reasons to play Nicol Bolas. The first one is one of the more common sideboard cards that we see nowadays is Pithing Needle. And most of the time, people will Pithing Needle name Karn the Great Creator. Well, Nicol Bolas does not happen to be a copy of Karn the Great Creator, so you can actually still combo off if your Karn gets needled. The second one is in the mirror match, you get Stonebrain for Karn, and you still have a win condition with Nicol Bolas, because you can actually activate. You can act if they play a Karn and you have a Nicol Bolas, you just have the access to cards again. So I think those are the 2 main reasons.
Interesting. Great point. All right. In third place, we had Lane 5893 on red green. This is a pretty.
Oh man, I love this deck.
This is a deck.
This is a pretty interesting build of red green. And so, Devon, you were saying that you've been playing a lot of red green. Obviously, this is a different kind of build. But what do you think about this deck?
I saw this deck and I'm looking at it again and I still don't really know what to think about it. So this is an Obosh deck, which means that we can only play odds. So the biggest evens to play in the traditional Gruul decks are Obliterating Bolt and Asika's Chariot, to a lesser extent a Crowan War. So essentially the trade-offs is you're getting rid of those 3 cards and you're basically swapping Obliterating Bolt for Strangle, which is kind of a relatively even swap. You're swapping Chariot for Nissa, Ascended, Animist, and then you are cutting a Crowan War for additional threats like Garruk's Harbinger. I'd have to play a little bit with this deck because I'm not sold on this Nissa. I know that you guys were talking about it during spoiler season, but I don't know if I'm sold yet.
Yeah, I feel like the game plan for this has to be more like ramp into a Nissa and sort of just buy time with like your blockers and things like that, and then you can sort of just build a giant army with your Ascended Animist and then just go, overrun them with the ultimate, or just, chip in or block with your Phyrexian horror creature tokens. I like it, of course, but like I don't really know how this is going to play out. But I think that perhaps with the game plan just sort of being like, hey, I'm going to ramp and then clog up the board and then go over the top. I'm going to use Domri for additional ramp mana. I can pick off dangerous creatures with the fight ability on Domri and then just go over the top with the Anthem effects. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, Garruk's Harbinger is a pretty interesting one. It's actually main deck here, which is a card that, again, gets to dodge Dreadbore, Power Word Kill, Fatal Push, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, at the end of the day, Nissa is essentially 7 mana win the game if you just cast it for 7. There's not many people that can beat the immediate overrun. So, and there is some ramp here, with the Domries and the Elves. So I could definitely see it. Fable too.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens with this. If anyone tries to, take up the reins of Gruul midrange with Obosh and keep running with Nissa.
I did famously say that Obosh was going to be the next companion that people complained about in Modern after Yorion got banned, and turns out it's Gigantha.
Yeah,
maybe,
too late
but
for
we'll
that.
Talk about that another time. Yeah, somehow it's Gigantha. All right, 4th place, Azorius Control from Ignotus 70 or 97. The year I graduated from high school. Hopefully that's not the year that this person was born, but
it might be.
This is just an Azorius Control list. There's not too much to say about this at this point, other than somehow when I play against blue-white, they always get me with their single censor. That's it there in this list. But otherwise, this is a pretty stock list. There's not really too many new cards in here or anything like that. But this is what we will see in some quantity. And especially, this is the type of deck, control decks always get some kind of bump at PTs, I feel like. Like you'll see an extra 5% or so. So we might even see this up north of 10%, 12% of the meta when it comes to the PT.
One thing about this real quick is just the one censor open deck list. If you know your opponent has one censor and you get censored, it's got to be the worst feeling in the world. I'm out.
It's on you.
Constantly play around it. Yeah. Censor's always the card. Censor buys so much tempo. It's just like, what if they have the censor? What am I going to play? Am I going to play into this? Make them have it? Or just like, time walk myself?
It reminds me a little bit of when I talked to Michael Rapp about playing Shadow, and he was like, you got to play Temur Battle Rage. You got to play it, even if you only play it with 1, just because it keeps him honest. 5th place, Mono Red Aggro, Lord Beerus.
This is more like the mid-rangey one, right? Like, I mean, if it stops at Torben, is that mid-range? I don't even know at this point. What would you call this, Devon?
It's really hard to call this an aggro deck when there's only 2 Monastery Swift Spears.
Yeah, that's my thing.
Yeah. So, I guess we could call it mid-range. It's like Gruul without the green cards, maybe? Is that a good way to put it?
The mana's really good.
Mana is good. I don't know. I don't hate this deck. I think that there's something to be said about playing Goblin Chainwhirler when, a lot of the decks have Llanowar Elves, so.
That's true. Shane, this is pretty much the deck that you day 2'd with at Grand Prix Phoenix all the way back in
basically
COVID,
like,
right?
Much of the same cards even at that point. You know what I mean? Like I think I had like 1 Hazaret, but yeah, Ferocidons, Torbrins, Lightning Strikes, all the classics. So I think we're still playing Wild Slash over Play with Fire because we didn't have it at that point. But I mean, I wish I had Kimana Faces Kakazan at that point. That'd be dope. Right. What a card.
This is just a list of cards I love, though. All right, 6th place. This is an interesting list by 7th Prophet. It is a Boros Yorion deck, but it has 2 red cards in it. One is Nahiri the Unforgiving, and the other one is Fable of the Mirror Breaker.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's running The Eternal Wanderer as a 4 of. It's running Phyrexian Vindicator as a 4 of. It's running kind of good white cards other than that. Knight of the White Orchid, Charming Prince, Thraben Inspector, Elite Spellbinder, Spirited Companion, Skyclave Apparition, Ossification as a removal spell of choice, which is interesting to see. You got 17 planes and 4 Sacred Foundries. Oh, wait, you can only put that on in basic. Yeah, so you got 17 planes.
Yeah.
So you can make that happen. And then Lay Down Arms, which can also help make that happen. What do you guys think about this deck?
This is a blink deck, right? Which makes sense because it's an ETB deck / blink deck. So Nahiri the Unforgiving allows you to rebuy ETB effects. Yorion, of course, if you ever get to Yorion in this deck, which you potentially will with all these creatures kind of disrupting your opponent and removing their spells with Portable Hole, Ossification. One thing we didn't mention, I feel like during the entire spoiler season, is Ossification hits Planeswalkers. That's a big deal. Like I think we kind of looked at it as like, hey, this is just a Chain to the Rocks that's a little bit more flexible. You don't have to have mountains. But even though it costs 1 more generic mana, getting a Planeswalker off the board can be a big deal. And then you can sort of reset that with your Yorion.
Yeah, I mean, think about the card that people were playing for a while to get rid of Planeswalkers. Azorius Control has one. It's Fateful Absence, which gives them a clue token instead. And this is just better than that in that sense.
Yeah, and then with Yorion down the road, you can Ossification something small early on. You get later down the road, Yorion blink it. So yeah, you get same thing but Chain of the Rocks too, Portable Hole, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Kind of love it. I love this. I love it. I would never play this deck because I would not be able to be good with it. But I mean, a pile of ETB effects, annoying your opponent with like Elite Spellbinder, Skyclave Apparition. We get to see Phyrexian Vindicator come here as a 4 of. Is this a card that you think would have seen play, Devon?
So I was actually just gonna talk about that. So I think that if we go back to the kind of the tier list and see what decks are on there, specifically the Gruul mid-range deck that Phyrexian I played a league last night and my opponent cast this card and I just had like what the heck am I supposed to do against this? all my red cards deal damage to it. So the one thing that I will say about Vindicator is specifically Bone Crusher Giant. There's a little bit of flavor text on it that says damage can't be prevented this turn. So you got to be a little bit careful with your Vindicator if you're getting into combat against 2 open mana. But yeah, it's just like there's not a lot that kills it and it flies. It's great. I'm pretty interested. I'm probably going to try this deck on the stream at some point.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to see Vindicator here just as a value. You know, it's just a card in this deck. Nobody's trying to do any weird combo with it. It's just a card. And great note about all the red removal in decks here because especially ones that can't also cast a terror.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to see Obliterator or Vindicator on the other side of the table as like a red deck.
You just got to have your stomp.
Yeah. All right, another Azorius Control deck in 7th place here by Plaza 23. This is another one that I think is pretty normal as far as the brewing, the actual deck list itself goes, except for the fact that we have the cat sideboard that I've seen a couple of times when we've been doing.
I love the cat sideboard
here. Yeah, where we have 3 Regal Caracal and 2 Brimaz. So we're bringing in threats.
Cat army, baby.
Yeah, at this point, I wonder if your opponent is playing Blue-White Control and they reveal Kahira, do you just have to keep in your power word kills? Like, you can't beat the cats if you cut all your power word kills. So.
Brutal.
Jukes like that, always more valuable than you think.
Yep. And then finally, we have Mono White Humans in 8th place by Starfall.
Yeah, it's Mono White Humans, baby.
There you go. All right. So this top 8, pretty conventional. Like we said, we talked about some of the most interesting tech we're seeing in these lists right now, the Bolus plan, things like that. Anything else you guys think about this top 8 when you look at it and think about where the metagame's evolving?
I mean, as far as the like big picture kind of thing, it's a lot of the decks that we would expect. Maybe the outlier being that Gruul Obosh deck, but 2 copies of blue-white. I guess the mono red deck is a little interesting, but I think from a broad perspective, just a lot of what we would expect, just kind of like really like the best part. The thing about Pioneers, you have to pick a solid deck. You have to have a solid game plan, and these decks pretty much have their solid game plan. So
there you go. All right, the next thing we were going to do is talk about some of the further down decks in here, just as far as new cards that are popping up. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, and we'll also give Devon a chance to talk about what he played in this actual tournament as well. So first up, though, we have 9th place is a Enigmatic Fires list that is running Atraxa as well as an Elish Norn. And then other than that, that's kind of Those are the new cards that are in the list. But, just keep in mind, of course, that Enigmatic Incarnation is a deck where you can search up whatever you need in a given situation. Seems like pretty good cards to add to the toolbox.
Enigmatic deck has 1 Siege Rhino. Just want to make sure that we got that one down.
Thank you for that note.
Can't forget about the Dr.
Rhino.
Rhinoceros.
Oh, I would love to forget about it, but I do still have my playset
I have some foils.
in hopes that someday it comes back. But what do we think about this deck? This is a deck that was pretty popular for a little while. We didn't talk about it in our meta breakdown earlier, but it's definitely a lot of people believe in this deck, and it picked up a couple of pretty powerful new tools. I mean, Elish Norn is a really powerful card, and so is Atraxa, and people are starting to recognize on Atraxa because I'm seeing people complain about TCG player orders being canceled at prices that were too low now, skyrocketing.
What is 5-color Fire's targeting? Is it saying like I'm going to go over the top of control? Is it saying like no creature deck's going to beat me? Like what is it good against and what is it not so good against, Devon?
This deck is completely insane against Rakdos. Like as good as you can possibly have as a Rakdos matchup. I don't think there's anything that has a better matchup against Rakdos. The trade-off is that you're really not great against mono green. So again, it's one of those things where you kind of have to pick and choose. You have to try to expect the metagame. So if you expect a lot more Rakdos, which as we talked about, I think that personally there's going to be a lot more Rakdos at the PT than mono green, then maybe this is something that you would want to look towards.
Yeah, if there's two things that PT players love, it is Blue-Eye Control and Jund. And so those are the two decks that we've talked about as being maybe overrepresented. Yeah, put them together.
This deck is basically just Blue-Eye Jund, right?
There you go. And then also one thing that players don't like that much is Tron, I think, which I think is a reason that MGD might end up being underrepresented in the field, potentially. Although, MGD is more complicated deck than Tron. Sorry, Tron players.
But back on the notes on the Atraxa and Elish Norn, I think Elish Norn was basically tailor-made for this deck. Like, it's something that you would... The best part about it is if you can go Enigmatic into Elish, you get to shut off all of their triggers, so nothing bad's going to happen to you on their turn. And then once you untap with it, with an Enigmatic in play, it's just like, what are they supposed to do? You just, like, I played a match with this deck, and I got to play Elish Norn, doubled up on a Skyclave trigger, and then a EOT sack it, double up on an Agent of Treachery trigger, and it's just like, what are they supposed to do? They just,
That's unbelievable. Yeah, and then you even get to do things like, you get to have Leyline Binding, get rid of 2 creature, or get rid of 2 permanents if you want to, and all kinds of things like that. Really powerful card, especially when you can just play it as a one-of and have it come up when you want it and not come up when you don't. 10th place was a red-green boats list by L1X0. And then also this is a similar deck to what you were on in 27th place in this one. So their list had 2 of the new Luca. You had 3. Theirs had 1 new sword. You had 2 of the new sword, the red-green sword. And then you also had 2 Miglaws. And since we have you here,
Miglaws.
why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think about those new cards, including the one that I refused to talk about on the first spoiler episode, which was Miglaws.
So first and foremost, Luca. I think that card is a shoe-in, probably at least 3 copies. Maybe the numbers will change a little bit, but I was just really impressed with it. The nice thing about it is it's flexible, because like if you don't have a 4-drop, if you don't have a Chariot, you have some extra mana, you can play it on 4, then you can also play it on 5. The -4 is exceptional against stuff like mono white, just decks that have a lot of elves. Like in the mirror match, you can, if they go like elf and a Stormseeker, and you have the Luca, you can just minus and kill both their elf and their Stormseeker. As far as the Sword of Fortune Frontier, the first couple of leagues that I played with it, I was really impressed, but I think it might have just been a matchup thing. I'm a little bit more down on it. I think maybe 1 main deck, maybe 0, and then put like 1 or 2 in the sideboard. Because it's not the best against Rakdos. They have a lot of black removal. They have Shieldred to block the protection doesn't matter against Shieldred. And then Miglaws is a card that I was initially it's the reverse. I was actually not really in on it at first, but the more I play with it, it's very versatile. The ability to get, main deck disenchants, more Seiju type things in the main deck. Being able to give it vigilance is very important, and then also +2/+2, hard to block, menace. The stats on it are unreal. So big fan of Miglaws, big fan of Luca. A little bit more down on the sword.
Yeah, that's too bad.
I'm looking at Luca again right now, and I'm just like, why did we not talk about this card more? And there's a lot of cards being spoiled, but I'm looking at it now. I'm like, this card is just good, right? Like ramp makes a beast, kill stuff.
Yeah, I guess I just kind of looked at it as like, this seems very much what it should cost for its abilities. But I mean, it's hard for me to have like the best Pioneer perspective, right?
Yeah, that's why we have Devon on for the best Pioneer perspective. How much were you getting out of the -4 when you got to trigger it? Like the greatest power among creatures you controlled as you activated this ability. Where do you think that hit?
So specifically, it comes up against decks that have Llanowar elves because usually they're playing other creatures, smaller creatures that you can kill alongside it. Like I played it against elves, and my opponent had like a lord and two other things, and I just played Luca minus kill their whole board. So you can get like the Fury aspect similar to what you get in Modern Art of Fury. But a lot of the times when you cast it, it's usually they've like you're either ahead, in which case the minus just puts you further ahead, or the board's, maybe the board's empty and you're making a 3/3, which means if you play it, you have to, I guess you'd play it on 5, minus make a 3/3, and then -4 it. But usually you'd rather just keep the Luca around at that point. So the play patterns mostly were play it and then just -1 every turn for it's like a expensive Bitter Blossom that makes 3/3s. That's really the most where it came up, especially against Rakdos, the grindy matchups where they kill your stuff. So
awesome. All right. So 11th place, we had a Naya mid-range deck by Standerson. Standerson's a pretty well-known streamer as well. I don't remember their non-Magic Online name. But Naya tokens with Mondrak, Dominus main. This is trying to get into the token building, I guess.
I got some thoughts on this deck. I actually played this on stream right before the show recording.
Oh, really?
The mana in this deck leaves something to be desired. It's kind of rough. You got Mondrak double white, Skyclave double white, and then you got a whole bunch of like red green lands. So the mana is a little bit awkward, but I will say Mondrak is extremely powerful, a lot better than I thought it was.
Not just for EDH, huh?
Yeah. You double up on it's also sick because you can with Mondrak, if you have Voice of Resurgence and a mana available, you play the Mondrak. If they go to kill it, you sack the voice, and with the trigger, you get 2 tokens off of the voice itself. And then, once that allows you to untap with Mondrak, and then if you untap with it, you play Asika's Cherry, make 4 2/2s. It's also absurd with Fable because you can go like Fable copy. The copy is a token, which means let's say you copy Voice, you get 2 copies of Voice, and then those both die at the end of turn, which gives you 4 elementals.
That is wild. Yeah. All right. 19th place, Mono White Humans by that one kid with Skrelv. Haven't seen too many humans lists with Skrelv yet, just because people were mostly thinking that that humans, being a human, really extremely matters to that deck. But maybe fitting in some protection is okay too. What do you think about this? This wasn't exactly where I was expecting Skrelv to show up, but we do think it's a card that is very pioneerable.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I'm looking at the list now. They actually trimmed on copies of Recruitment Officer, which, to my knowledge, was... I don't know if that was the weakest one drop because that was the one that was at least pretty good against Rakdos up. You kept up on cards. So I'm not 100% sure if Cutting Officer is where you want to be, but I don't hate the card itself.
Yeah. All right. Last couple of decks from this one. There was a player in 20th with Auras with Skrelv, which is where we actually thought Skrelv was going to show up.
Like a Naya Auras.
Well, this is kind of the normal way that this deck works, is that it's about searching up one-ofs of Ghost Form and Hammerhand with Light Paws to be able to get your haste and also keep it from being killed, basically, because of Ghost Form. So they're sort of splashing Auras, but you're really just tutoring up those copies.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I think Auras is a deck that, certainly had a moment at the RCs, could come back because of Skrelv. I don't know if we have to dive too much into it unless you have thoughts about Auras, but I like playing Auras in Pioneer, so I'm glad to see it around. 21st, Golgari Citadel by Carnage Cards ENT, the first Tyvar deck that we've seen, at least in our particular discussion now. Tyvar, one of the cards that I think is the best in the set, not quite where I thought it would show up. What do you think about Bolas' Citadel?
So this is something that I had in mind, specifically with Priest of Forgotten Gods. Being able to give that card haste and untap it gets you a lot of cards. So like Tyvar, in that weird indirect way, you can untap the elves to ramp you towards Citadel, but it's also you can untap the priest. So if you even if your elf dies, you can go priest, activate, untap priest. That's 4 mana toward the Citadel right there. So this deck has always been pretty powerful, and I think Tyvar is just like an easy shoe in this deck.
Yeah, what are your overall thoughts on Tivar / Tyvar. We talked about this in your chat today while you were streaming. The Tyvar versus Tivar thing, not about Tyvar himself. Like, what do you think Tyvar's place in Pioneer is especially? Do you think he's sort of like going to be in something like these priest decks? Do you think he has a place in elves? Do you think there's some kind of other creature combos that we're not seeing yet or just aren't good enough?
So I actually did a YouTube video where I did my top cards from the new set. Tyvar was my number one, and I haven't really seen it a ton. This is really the only shell that we've seen it so far. I tried it in a bunch of different decks. I tried it in Elves. I tried it in Prime Speaker Vanifar, which I know is a deck that Dave loves. But yeah, it's been decent so far. I was actually kind of unimpressed with it in Elves, believe it or not, but I think that might just be part of the way that I constructed my deck. I had a lot of 3-drops. It was really clunky. So I think that maybe it has a place as like a 1 or 2 of an Elves, but these shells, like when you're pairing it alongside Priest of Forgotten Gods and cards like Prime Speaker Vanifar, that's where it gets really out of control.
Yeah, that makes sense. Couple quick things. 24th, there's kind of a bigger red-white deck by Prophet of Fire with some Elish Norn main and also Sarah Paragon, which is just interesting to see somebody try out a bigger version of these white decks. It's a little bit like the red-white deck that we saw earlier. No Nahiri, but it's kind of like more Sarah Paragons, more Elish Norns, Elspeth Conqueror's Death, which is a pretty interesting card that you see pop in and out in Pioneer here and there. 25th place was Azorius Control by Claudio, which I just included here because I was like, I don't think I've ever seen Claudio play blue-white control. Am I wrong about that?
Looks like recently, since dabbling, I think, among other things. But yeah, I think finally switched off Niv to Light to Azorius Control towards the end of last year, it looks like, from the track record.
Yeah, he's been jamming it a lot lately. He's got the cats too.
Got it, cats.
He's
cats
got the cats.
Can't wait to talk about more cats. This episode's going to take a real hard right turn into cats coming up here in a little bit. 31st place, Rogues by Muriel Marcos with the new Jace, the Perfected Mind. I will say, in the heyday of when Historic was a fun format,
yeah,
Rogues was one of my jams that I loved to play on Arena. It would be fun to see some of these cards come back and actually be good, honestly. And somehow Jace is a card that could make that happen. I don't know. This one I had some doubts about, but I thought it was cool to see Jace in here as a self-mill.
Yeah, Jace looks, I know there's been a lot of Jace in Modern, but it looks pretty interesting here. Especially with the Rogue package like Ruin Crab and Thieves Guild, you're milling quite a bit. So there's a good chance that -2 is going to be turned on most of the time. So
yeah, awesome. All right, well, that's that event. And then, so let's just do the top 8, some new cards to keep an eye on. And then Sunday, we had this Pioneer Showcase that Devon was nice enough to write up the notes on this for. Do you want to take us through some of it? Or Shane, do you want to take us through this set?
Yeah, so we've got this Sunday Showcase Challenge. Of course, there's always a little bit more. There's more entry. There's more prizing. People are going to bring out the big guns perhaps during these. And so let's start with Dirk 714 on 4-color Enigmatic Fires, an Elish Norn, no Atraxa, Archon of Sun's Grace. Tell me about this card. You pointed this out, Devon.
So Archon of Sun's Grace, specifically this player, Dirk 714, it's Derek Davis, who actually just recently participated in one of the Magic Online Championship finals, the 8-player big events. So very well known, very renowned player. And this particular list, I know that I believe they played this deck at the NRG Championships as well, if I recall correctly. I think they played this. And the one copy of Archon of Sun's Grace. So not a lot of people play the 4-drop in the Enigmatic deck because you don't want to sacrifice your Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but it can come up in some spots. This is a 3/4 flying lifelink, gives your other Pegasus lifelink, and whenever an enchantment constellation, whenever enchantment enters the battlefield, you get a 2/2 Pegasus. So against decks that have are trying to go wide, mono white, Gruul, the ability to make a bunch of 2/2s, the 3/4 doesn't die to a lot of the red removal, so you get to dodge that stuff. And then once you untap, you can kind of just go make 3 2/2 flying lifelinks, and it's really, really hard for a lot of those red decks to keep up with that. And then the one Elish Thorn with no Atraxa. I think the Atraxa may be a point of contention. I don't think a lot of the Enigmatic decks had it, but I know that some of them did, but this one chose to eschew it.
I wanted to ask you a question about Atraxa. So Atraxa, obviously a giant creature with a whole bunch of keywords, right? But it doesn't draw a lot of cards in this deck unless I'm reading it wrong, right? You basically draw 3 when you bring it into play. A creature, an enchantment, and a land. Maybe that's just good enough when you can search it up, so that's why people are going for it. But how do you feel about it?
I did try it when the set came out. I tried it. I played a little bit of the enigmatic deck, and I played both Elder Snort and Atraxa. It was okay. Like you said, it doesn't draw a lot of cards, but the body stabilizes very nicely. And the one important aspect of it is it doesn't die to power word kill. So if the Rakdos deck is leaning more in on power word kill and fatal push and less on Dreadbore, it's really not that easy for them to kill it, and it's basically impossible to race it. So.
All right, second place, Gruul, mid-range, Happy Sandwich. So this is kind of looking like a lot of our sort of established Gruul turn creatures sideways decks. It does have a couple new Miglaws, Maze Crushers. It's not running the Luca, it's not running any of the swords like you were testing out, Devon. Tell me a little bit about this deck, because this takes me back to when I was really into Standard. And I was playing like Gruul mid-range decks and just like turning stuff sideways, ramping out creatures, and loving every second of it. Is there more to it than that? Do I just get to attack and kill people, or is there something special to this deck that makes it better or worse in particular metas?
No, I mean that's pretty much it. We're just trying to cast cast some 3-drops. I mean, ideally the best curve is Llanowar Elf into turn 2 Reckless Stormseeker into turn 3 Chariot. Those are that's the deck's best draws. There's some interesting things about this deck list, though. First and foremost, there's only 7 elves. So they've decided to cut the 8th copy of the elf, which I find a little bit strange. 3 Bone Crusher Giant, very strange as well. I think that Bone Crusher's in an amazing spot right now. And then the other point of contention is main deck Werewolf Pack Leader versus a different 2-drop that would allow you to Companion Giganta or just no 2-drops altogether. I am still of the opinion that you definitely want to play Giganta, and I don't think that getting Pack Leader is worth it. This deck also has Embercleave, I guess, to prevent you from Giganting. But yeah, a lot of the same stuff that you see, just maybe a slightly different take here.
Yeah, and some particular sideboard cards would also keep you from winning Giganta, which is a Thrun, Breaker of Silence. You've got the new 1 Thrun, which is just a 5-mana 5/5, can't be countered with trample, can't be the target of non-green spells or abilities from non-green sources, and it has indestructible on your turn. Just worth running.
This is your control sideboard card, right? Like this is, yeah.
And then Chandra Awakened Inferno, of course, also has double pips, and that's a card that I've seen in some of these decks just to go over the top again against control decks.
Yeah, and I think the decision to split the can't be countered spells is there's some spots where Chandra's may be a little bit weaker if they have, like, some people board in Pithing Needle, and they're already going to bring a Needle against you anyways because you have Chariot. So splitting the Chandra and the Thrun does make a lot of sense there.
Cool, that makes total sense. We've got third place, Stefano O on Ginger's list from yesterday. Fourth place, _ZNT_ on Ari Zach's list from the Saturday challenge. So third and fourth place, just running those first and second place decks back.
Interesting.
Fifth place, Martin Dominguez on 5 Color Fires. And I really wish that I had spent more time looking at the difference between the 4 color and the 5 Color Fires decks, because it looks like there are some differences I should care about, or maybe not.
I don't really think so for the most part. I think it's just the labeling. Okay, no, I apologize. So the 4-color deck does not have any black cards in the main deck. The 5-color deck has, and I should have noted this down. This is Callous Blood Mage. We get
Siege Rhino,
Yep, Siege Rhino, and Zur Eternal Schemer. So these are the black cards that they're kind of incorporating in. Now, it's kind of a fake 5-color deck because you're just going to be searching these off of Enigmatic Incarnation anyways, not casting them most of the time. But that's kind of the fake 5th color is for those 3 cards. Siege Rhino showing up again. Maybe it's maybe Elesh Norn is what we need to bring Siege Rhino back into the metagame.
Oh my gosh.
And then Massacre Girl on the side. This was a card that I randomly would have cast against me on Magic Arena, and I would just be like, what the heck just happened? Because I feel like that card can do a lot.
Double trigger with Elesh Norn?
Love it. Let's do it.
I was just over here salivating about Nylia's presence with Elesh Norn. Yeah, let me draw 2 cards off of this thing, Abundant Growth.
Dave, are you secretly just like a Panharmonicon player? You just want to be doing that?
I mean, maybe I am. It's been a long time coming. All right, let's see what's next.
All right, pin 2 NTG on Obzon Greasefang. kind of just running like what? Like a shaving a Wayfinder, adding a silence. We have Doom Whisperer making an appearance, which is that's what's way back in the day.
So this particular list here, we have trimmed a Satyr Wayfinder down to 3 copies, 2 Lilianas in the main, which is something that we don't typically see in Greasefang. I've seen it kind of float in and out a little bit. The 1 main deck Silence, the 1 Traverse. There's a Murderous Cut here as well, and no copies of Eldritch Evolution, which is something sometimes that people play. But usually you would play Eldritch Evolution alongside Stitcher Supplier, which we don't see the suppliers here as well. So that's kind of like a package deal.
Since we're talking about Greasefang, and I feel like we've sort of talked about Greasefang a lot on the show because it's always one of those decks where, like, sure, it seems like you can win pretty convincingly at times, but then it's one of those decks that people don't even have to target to beat, right? Like, you're going to run Graveyard Hate, you're going to run certain types of cards that will make Greasefang just not function very well. What are your kind of thoughts on, would you ever play Greasefang? Would you ever bring Greasefang to a tournament? Like, what's kind of your incentive to do so?
If I ever thought about playing Greasefang, I think what I would do is I would go into my wallet and I would pull out a quarter and then I would flip it. And if it landed on heads, that would be the day to play Greasefang. I mean, no, I'm just kidding. But at the end of the day, there is a lot of variance involved. Like you said, people don't really have to want to beat you, which is not something that a lot of graveyard decks of the past can say, like Dredge, for example. This Greasefang deck being a graveyard deck that's also weak to Fatal Push and very common sideboard removal spells, on top of the fact that people play Trespasser, Unlicensed, or Scavenging Ooze, all this kind of stuff. So personally, I don't think I would, but you got, if you feel like you're going to run pretty good, then maybe that's the day. I will say these Doom Whisperers are kind of hot in the sideboard. I haven't seen that card before.
Yeah, I was looking at it.
Yeah, that's like it lets you surveil stuff into your graveyard, which is nice, right? And as much as you want, you can do it as many times as you have life. Pay 2 life, surveil 2.
It's the fixed Gristle brand.
The 7th place deck, Terabad on Mono Green Devotion. This one has no Nicol Bolas, so it's just it's doing just the classic Karn Kiora.
But it's got a Mightstone and Weakstone main. Yeah, that's the thing that's really surprising to me is that I saw some of the earlier decks had it in the sideboard, and in fact, this one also has a copy in the sideboard. What's up with having 1 main? Just is it a little bit of ramp and a little bit of creature removal, just like a kind of like a Band-Aid slapped over the side of a couple of different things you want to try to do? Or what do you think is the idea behind having 1 main?
So the thing that I never kind of understood, and maybe this is just me as a player, but I know this is going to sound crazy because it's a Karn sideboard, but there are actually sideboard plans for Mono Green Devotion. So I think the main deck, Mightstone and Weakstone, is really just an extension of the sideboard. It's essentially a 16th sideboard card slotted into the main deck. Mm-hmm. Part of this, like, maybe you want to board in 2 against certain decks that you don't think you're going to have access to Karn against, which I think is a good plan against Rakdos, because if you expect your Karn to get Thoughtseized, having a high impact artifact that you can hit off of Storm the Festival, which kills Shieldred, so it's very important there, is maybe an avenue that you want to explore.
Interesting. I've seen people talking about this card and blinking it lately too, Mightstone and Weakstone, and I was like, wow, yeah, that would be pretty devastating to be able to blink this every turn. But cool card to have around.
And I've noticed in the sideboards of some of these green decks that the Filigree Silex is making an appearance, and it's interesting to me because it's just basically an slightly upgraded Ratchet Bomb. And Ratchet Bomb wasn't something that we were seeing. I guess that was not Pioneer legal before, correct? Is Ratchet Bomb? Was it? Yes.
Yeah, it's in 15 or 16.
Yeah. So I guess that's what I'm looking at, just being like, well, why we weren't running Ratchet Bomb before? Is Filigree Silex that much better that we're going to run it now? In case you just like board stalls, like remove the 10 oil counters and dome them?
I mean, I hope we see that on camera at the PT. I would love for somebody to get dome shotted for 10. I think it might just be upstairs. I think it might just be part of like the metagame. As people are more shifting towards like these, I'm trying to think of like the Llanowar Elves decks. So like Gruul, for example, if people are upticking Gruul, then Needle gets a lot better, or not Needle, the Ratchet Bomb effect. The other thing that I will say, it's actually an out to cards that you wouldn't normally have an out to in the sideboard. Like against the Angels matchup, if they get a Righteous Valkyrie that's more than 5 toughness, you really can't kill that because you have Boat and Mightstone. But Filigree Silex could be a way to way around that.
Sweet. All right, in the 8th place, we have Adabivoise on Rakdos mid, and it looks really close to Misplaced Changer's list. They don't have the Lily, and they have another Graveyard Trespasser instead. So there's our top 8 players. Again, we have some sort of established decks in the Enigmatic Fires, the Mono Green Devotion, the Greasefang, and Rakdos, and we have some newer things like this, this Gruul mid-range deck, and some new additions to the Fires decks, but nothing's like completely going wild in the top 8 here.
One thing that I will say about this top 8 that kind of surprised me is 2 copies of Enigmatic, where, we haven't seen this deck doing super well over the past. We saw one in 9th place in the last challenge, but it's been kind of a dip in terms of the metagame share. And I think part of that was because of the rise in Mono Green. As Mono Green, the Enigmatic deck has a very hard time against Mono Green. But as we see the metagame shift maybe more towards Rakdos, then Enigmatic becomes a lot more appealing because that matchup is just a cakewalk for the Enigmatic decks.
Got it.
Yeah.
Anything?
Let's hop into the rest of the tournament.
Yeah. Anything? Anything you wanna pick out in the rest of the top 32? There's some decks you called out when you were preparing for the episode, and some things I think are particularly interesting. Like, what are the things that you really saw there?
So 9th place, we had Think 64 on Mono Blue Spirits. Now, looking at the deck list, there wasn't really any new cards here. There's 2 things that I want to kind of go over here. So not Blue-White, not Azorius, which with Seachrome Coast, I think we kind of expected more people to play Azorius, than that would be the preferred version moving forward. The reason I think to play Mono Blue is more so you have a little bit more game in the Rakdos matchup because of Faceless Haven, and Azorius doesn't have access to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's maybe a reason. And also you are probably a little bit better in terms of like when you're on the play and you have your 1-drop into Curious Obsession plus protection up, that is a way to beat Rakdos, where it's not that great of a matchup for Spirits. So that could be kind of a way to cheese them, but just something worth noting there in 9th place.
I mean, that was a deck that's super popular towards the end of RCQ season last year, kind of fell off, and now the previous challenge, yesterday's challenge, the 11th challenge, was also probably had 4 or 5 different Spirits lists within the top 32 that we didn't talk about. It hasn't been on my radar. It is one of my favorite decks in Pioneer. Do you think there's any chance that this kind of deck becomes something that pros would bring to the PT, or is this just kind of not have enough playability, kind of?
See, it's tough if you expect a lot of Rakdos, because I think that matchup is an uphill battle for the Spirits players. But if maybe they predict the metagame to be a lot more Mono Green and Lotus, then Spirits is an amazing call, because those 2 matchups are just, absolutely amazing for the Spirits decks. So I think it really, at the end of the day, comes down to, and a lot of what this is, a lot of this whole preparation, especially when you're testing on a team and you're trying to gather all this information, is you have to, at some point, you have to make a decision on what you expect the metagame to be, because that is going to inform your deck choice. And, if they get it right, then Mono Blue could be a really good call.
Awesome. I'll be pulling for it down at the station. What's next? What else did you see in mind?
I had 10th place here. Just wanted to note that there was a Gruul mid-range deck. Just as far as new cards, there's 2 Miglaws, 1 Luca, no Swords main, and then an additional Luca in the sideboard. So two Miglaws, 2 Luca, and then no Swords. But 12th place here, we got a nice one. So this is Watu, which is Guillaume Wafotapa, Dimir Control. Not a lot of new cards. Oh, you don't say. Yeah, did you know who that is?
I've heard it once or twice.
Yeah. Wait until you talk about the other person who was playing Dimir Control in this challenge, in the showcase as well.
Who's that guy? Nobody knows that guy.
Only 3 Hall of Famers that I can see so far already, but go on.
So Watu's deck specifically, there's not a ton of new cards in the main deck. I know that Nassif, who we might get to at some point, was playing a lot of copies of Shield Receiving. Watu was only playing 1 copy. 2 main deck Narsets, no Days Undoings. But the spice here, there is 4 copies. That is right, 4 copies, not a typo, of Blue Sun's Twilight in the sideboard.
Whoa, we didn't even talk about any of the Twilights in our spoiler episodes, because just we're like, none of these are really worth talking about. What is this card?
Blue Sun's Twilight, X generic blue sorcery, gain control of target creature with mana value X or less. If X is 5 or more, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So this is functionally better version of that card from Ixalan. Was that called Enchanting Melody? Is that what that card is? Yeah. And so that's the first sentence of this card, and then this one tacks on to the end of it. If it's 5 or more, make another token of it. What are we doing with 4 of this card? We must be stealing low drops of some kind.
See, I was thinking the other way. I was thinking against green, where if they stick a Cav and you go X equals 5, steal your Cav, make a copy of Cav. Because the cool thing about that line is you get 2 Cav triggers, which means you can tap out, get 2 Cavs, get 2 untapped lands, and hold up a counterspell.
Wow.
Now, you could also, against maybe like the sort of lower to the ground decks who have like the Elvish Mystics, maybe 3 mana take an elf. But the thing about that exchange is you would be spending 3 mana to take 1 elf, which is not the best exchange because you have to do it. We have to wait until turn 3. They've already gotten value out of their elf. So I think it's more for like the top end stuff. Old Growth Troll, I could see it being particularly good against, and then the Cavaliers. But yeah, very interesting card. We really haven't seen like Dimir Control play these sort of control magics before. It's been a while, at least since I've seen them.
Yeah, and we might as well talk about 17th place, as you mentioned. Gabe Nassif, also in this challenge, also playing Dimir Control. Similar deck. It doesn't have the Blue Sun Zenith in the side. Does have 3 Shieldred's Edicts main, which you mentioned about Wafo's deck as well, having 1. This card was one of my favorite cards on the spoiler episode. I thought that this had some potential to do something. I wasn't sure about it in Pioneer. Thought it had some applications in Modern, honestly, but I think this is a powerful removal spell and more flexible than it looks like it is.
Yeah, it's funny. When I looked at it at first, I didn't think too much of it, but the more I've played against it, like the stuff that you would normally expect to blanket edict, like Lovestruck Beast 1/1s or just random tokens, it doesn't do that against this card. So I think it's definitely, right. I should have respected it a little bit more, and yeah, I'm not surprised to see 3 copies here.
We also have our meat in our Hall of Famer sandwich here of Willie Adel, 16th place on Gruul midrange. This is similar to kind of the last Gruul deck we talked about, where it has the 4 werewolf pack leaders. It has the Sickest Chariot, the Sky Sovereigns, a couple Embercleaves. This one has a singleton of the Swords of Forge and Frontier, and 2 main deck Cankerbloom, which is just that sort of flexible 2-drop that can be sacrificed for disenchant or a proliferate effect.
The one really nice thing about Cankerbloom as well, specifically against Bonecrusher Giant, that if your opponent stomps your Cankerbloom, normally with a card like Outland Liberator, you had to have a target to sacrifice it, but you can just sacrifice the Cankerbloom to blank the Bonecrusher half of it because you can just proliferate. So it's a kind of a small upgrade. The 3rd power is good as well. The one thing that I want to note here about this mana base, and something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend if you're playing Gruul, but there's 4 Copperline Gorge and 4 Lair of the Hydra. Now, in terms of building mana bases, that's a lot of fast lands, and you have cards like, well, I guess, this list has 3 Asika's Chariots. So the issue with that is you're going to find yourself in a lot of spots where your 3rd or 4th land may come into play tapped more often than you'd like it. And when you have, powerful cards like Chariots and Swords and Boats and all this kind of stuff, I would shy away from playing the full. I would play the 4 Gorges, but I don't think I'd play the 4 Lairs.
Interesting. You have words for Willie Adel.
Come at me.
I wonder if Willie is queued for this or not. He does just pop up occasionally in tournaments like this and kind of bring the rock, so to speak. This is not really a rock deck, like what you would see pop up in Modern, but it's cool to see him playing it for sure. There was one more person on Gruul mid in 29th place. It was Yao Claudio MS. Gruul mid, and you noted that they had 2 Lukas and 2 Swords as well, so they're a believer in Luka, where some of the other Gruul decks we have seen have not been running it at as much.
Yeah, I think that list specifically was actually the first list that I played almost card for card. I think they changed 1 card, and that was the list that I 3-1 to prelim with, where I started with 2 Lukas, 2 Swords. So very, very similar to where I was at it first. And yeah, it feels kind of weird to be trimming on Lovestruck Beast, because that's what I was doing personally when you're playing with Sword, because the 1/1 from Lovestruck Beast, which normally doesn't matter in a lot of spots, comes up a lot more when you have the Sword to make essentially every creature late game a threat. And that's why I like the Sword at first so much, is because you top deck an elf later on, and all of a sudden it's now a 3/3 that draws you 2 cards. So it just kind of turns all of your otherwise dead late game top decks into actual threats.
Can we talk about this 22nd place deck? before we probably move on to some more meat of this episode, because this is something that I thought we would see, and this is kind of the only example of it, which is a Rakdos Anvil deck by GXS 3v3N with 4 Gleeful Demolition in the main deck, which is kind of, the red sorcery, destroy target artifact, and if you controlled it, you get to make 3 1/1 goblin tokens. And so these sacrifice decks are always some things that I think will have some kind of legs just due to kind of their resiliency and grindiness and ability to stop aggro decks in their tracks often, but we're not kind of seeing them overwhelm the meta. But this is kind of the direction I thought it would go with Gleeful Demolition.
Yeah, this deck looks particularly good. We got some experimental synthesizers and research desks to go alongside the Gleeful Demolitions, both of which to give you a little bit of value alongside the Unicult Anvils. The one thing that I will note is we talked about how with the Rakdos Sacrifice deck, the reason that I think a lot of people don't want to gravitate towards it is it has a rough matchup against mono green, specifically the card Karn the Great Creator. The awkward part about adding Oni Cult Anvil to your deck is you make your deck a lot weaker to Karn the Great Creator. So if mono green has a bit of a tick up and a resurgence, might not be where you want to be. But as far as the list is concerned, I love it. I think Demolition is an awesome card. The card that I kind of want to pair it with is Reckless Bushwhacker. You don't have the same redundancy as you do in modern, like the 8 whack decks, but I think there potentially could be something there.
We talked a lot about some of these Pioneer challenges, and I don't know exactly what we learned about the format. Like, there's some things that I noticed, but like I don't know, Devon, what does this make you think when you both in your experiences in the challenges and just paying attention to the meta and kind of what you're seeing when you're playing on stream? Like, what are people playing in the format right now, and is it kind of shifting even in the last 2 weeks since like the Frank article we talked about?
So, at least my own personal experience, I actually played in both of these events over the weekend. The Pioneer Challenge on Saturday, I played against Rakdos 4 times, and then I think a smattering of other decks. And then on the Showcase Challenge, I actually dropped when I was 2 and 3, played against Rakdos 3 times. So, of the 12 matches of Magic I played against a total of 12 matches, 7 Rakdos decks. That is a lot. And it's kind of what I expect. I do expect Rakdos to be the most played deck. And I think a lot of it might have to do with, like, we talk about these teams who want to go through and try and break the format. Well, if they can't break the format, I think Rakdos is the deck that pros would gravitate towards the most because it offers you the most amount of agency. Like, people just love casting Thoughtseize. They get to sculpt their entire game plan around it. It's just an awesome card to cast. And so you can leverage play skill. It gives you a lot of leeway with sideboarding decisions. Like we saw, Ginger had like 5 sweepers in his sideboard. So I think it is the most flexible and the most just abstractly good card deck. And I believe it will be the most played deck. And I think that these kind of results should speak to that as well.
Something that I noticed just in terms of like the top 32s is that mono white humans was not really showing up in these 2 challenges. And, like we talked about earlier, I've heard a lot of accounts recently about people saying that this deck is towards the top of the meta, both Fallout from the NRG and Ross and Tannen over on Rants were talking about mono white still being something that they would expect to be really well positioned, but we're not seeing it kind of show up here. And like you said, we still saw tons of Rakdos, a lot of mono green devotion, even though we heard about the purported downswing of those decks from Frank. But are they just so good in their raw power level that like they're not going anywhere?
Yeah, they're definitely the 2 best decks. One thing that is kind of strange as well, kind of piggybacking off of the Frank Karsten thing, is we didn't see a lot of Lotus Field. So,
Yep.
And I wonder if part of that has to do with specifically Magic Online, that there are a lot of clicks required to go through and execute the full combo. That is a possibility. I don't know if that would necessarily, shy people away from playing it. But
people might not like friendly scoop against it because it's the challenge, not a league or something like that.
Yeah, in a larger event like that. But specifically mono white, I think there was a consensus that mono white had a good Rakdos matchup, or at least a somewhat favorable, maybe closer to even. back before the R season around that time frame. But I think over time, when you get people like Ginger who are playing, hundreds of leagues of Rakdos, they hammer out sideboard plans and they figure out ways to beat them. And I think one thing that I've noticed, I watched Ginger a good bit, is the evolution of the Rakdos deck and the sideboard plans and what he does in certain matchups. People are watching that and they're figuring out how to beat these matchups with Rakdos. And we saw a lot of the Rakdos lists that we saw in these events were just carbon copies of Ginger's list, and there's a good reason. It's just the best list.
Yeah, let someone else do the work and then just net deck it. That's my favorite tactic, honestly.
Shane, we're not equipped to do anything other than that.
That's a good point.
That's what we can do. We hope to be able to pilot the decks effectively.
I changed one sideboard card. It's mine now.
Then it's a brew, right?
Exactly.
What are you seeing, Dave? Anything that you're thinking about just in response to these challenges, based on what we talked about? We've been talking about Pioneer more than we have a lot in the past few weeks. So it's like I feel like we're actually paying attention to it more.
Yeah, I want to get into. So we talked earlier about that it's possible someone might break it. So I'd love to spend the last part of the show here talking about
Cat Hammer,
the sleeper decks that might be
Can we talk about
there.
Cat Hammer?
I mean, Cat Hammer is going to be the first one, but I did want to tee Devon up here. So Devon, like we said, has been making a lot of he's been streaming full-time, content creation full-time, did a great video about a week and a half ago, launched on Monday the 6th, called These New Phyrexia Pioneer Brews Are Crazy. And it was an awesome kind of like overview of 8 or 9 or 10 different decks that had popped up right at the beginning of this Phyrexia 1 All Will Be One season. And so I think people should go check out that video, even though it's been out for a week or so, to see, just if you want to see what types of things are going on. Devon has individual videos for most of the decks that you talked about on that list. Maybe your plan is to go through all of those. So far, it's just most of them. But I think we should go through some of the decks from that video and talk about, if you think any of these were the ones that you have a chance to break it, or just what you think has the most potential to be a total rogue deck that could surprise everybody at the Pro Tour.
Sure, yeah.
And for me, that really starts with Cat Hammer. So,
because this is more than just a meme, right? I mean, potentially more than just a meme. People are winning with it.
Well, I think it depends, right? So I'll tee it up here too. So I really love Hammer in Modern. I've been enjoying playing it the last couple of months. As soon as Kemba came out, people started realizing, okay, we have another equipper in Pioneer. Has some weird constraints around it. What kind of deck can we make out of this? And there are way more versions of this deck flying around than I thought there actually would be.
Yeah, and like you said, there are the different versions we've seen. So I think the very first list that I saw was from, I think it was Da Vinci MTG on Twitter. It was kind of like the original Boros sketch, which had Kembas. They had the Warrior package with Fireblade Charger, Cacophony Scamp, Resolute Strike, your Force of Guard's Aid, some mixture of Open the Armory, I think is what it's called. That's the tutor, and then fighter class. So there was that version. There was the White Green Cats version, which I believe was played, I think it was either Happy Sandwich or Crusher Bot. So Crusher Bot, which is a modern hammer grinder, they 4-0'd a prelim that had their deck had like Sacred Cat, Feline Sovereign, the other 2-mana 1/1 double strike cat, Adorned Pouncer, kind of like a cat theme with Kahira. And then there was a version that I saw the other day on Twitter, I think it was earlier this morning, from Pascal Maynard, which was a mono white cats version, Sacred Cat, Adorned Pouncer, Kahira. And then you're going mono white, so you play, I think it was around 18 basic planes to play both ossification and laydown arms. So you get premium removal in addition to the cat package. So like Dave said, a lot of different ways to build this deck. I've played a few leagues with it. My initial reaction is still a little bit skeptical. I don't think we've quite found the best version yet, but it's definitely has the potential. The video, clickbait and whatever. But the video that I uploaded yesterday was Pioneer is now a turn 2 format, and I did have one turn kill in 5 rounds. So basically, but. Yeah, I think that there's some stuff there it's very powerful. The Warrior Shell, I think, is probably the best version because you get to play the Resolute Strike, which is again additional equippers, like Dave was saying.
Yeah, so you like the combo version, and just so people understand, it's Cacophony Scamp is the one where if you get a hit in it with a hammer attached to it, you then get to sacrifice it to do a fling.
Oh, sweet
effect. right? And so
Yeah.
what happens is the person is just dead at that point because you hit them for 20 with it, essentially. And so it's more of a combo aspect to it than, Pascal Maynard, who won the RCQ that he was in with the cat deck, also said, I think this is the worst deck I've ever registered for an event or something like that. I was like, wow,
honest.
okay. Yeah, at least he's honest. And then, the Crusher Bot decks, like you said, I think people are really interested in those, but it's the more that I've watched different people or just seen the different lists floating around, I'm definitely the most interested in trying out the one with Cacophony Scamp because I think the combo aspect of it is powerful to try to just go extremely fast, try to get through things as much as you can, rather than going wide with a bunch of cat lords and stuff like that.
The one last thing that I will say about it is, so you think about as a modern Hammer deck has the backup plans of Stoneforge for Cauldra and Urza Saga. So what I think that what we need to find is we need to find a better backup plan. So, you think like sometimes there's like if you could maybe play more copies of the sword because the sword is just naturally good with like if you have a random creature plus a Sigarda's Aid, you can kind of get a mana discount on it. Potentially Showdown of the Skulls, which is a card that I saw Da Vinci playing. I incorporated that in my list, but I think what we need to find is some sort of backup plan, either as a sideboard pivot or a sideboard juke, or potentially just incorporating that into the main deck, but something that kind of flows better with the rest of the curve, because a lot of these cards are expensive and clunky. So,
yep, totally makes sense. Okay, and so the last thing I'm going to do here is we're going to rate it from Pro Tour 0 to Pro Tour Hero. This is closer to Pro Tour 0 than Pro Tour Hero, it sounds like to me. Is that where your mind is at?
Like 40-60 maybe. It's like just
40-60.
I feel like it's just below the halfway point because there's no other deck in the format that can kill on turn 2. Let's just get that out of the way. This is the only one that can do that. So it is powerful. If you, like I said, if you want a high roll, but I think past the high roll, if you find a way to make the backup plan good, that's when this deck gets broken.
Awesome. All right. Next thing on the list that was interesting or that I saw the most talk around the last week on Twitter, Mind Splice Apparatus turn / cheating mana / its Wilderness Reclamation, but more powerful deck. This is one that you talked about on your video, and it was centered around taking extra turns. I've seen Todd Anderson trying out a couple of versions that have less kind of turns cards in them, less taking extra turns in them. You had 8 between Auron's Epiphany and Part the Water Veil. I think the list I've seen that he only has Auron's Epiphany in them. But this is, I haven't seen too many of these in the results at all yet. Have you played this? What do you think about this deck right now as far as is Mind Splice Apparatus really kind of going to be a powerful engine?
1 league in. I think I only got to play 1 league with it, maybe a league and a half. It felt okay. The games where, the way that I constructed my version is I was, as you said, way more all in on the apparatus turns aspect. So the versions, I should say, because Todd has been playing a ton of this deck, way more than I have. But the versions that Todd was working on were mostly just kind of control decks that had apparatus as kind of like, how the Wilderness Rec decks didn't have like a ton of the time walks, but they would use Rec as just to get this massive mana advantage with like a small expansion explosion, draw a bunch of cards, and then that would find the kill. So that's kind of the idea where you play apparatus. It's a little bit slower, but you play apparatus, play some control cards, and then kind of go off from there. What I was doing is I was playing the maximum number of time walks, so the 4-part the Water Veils. I was splashing for Growth Spiral just to play apparatus a turn early to just get the combo going. I was even playing with the Anticipate that proliferates because the turn after you play Mind Splice, the Anticipate, which I think it's called Experimental Augury, you anticipate, you spend a mana, proliferate onto the Mind Splice, which gives you the mana that you spent back. So it's effectively just a free spell the turn that you're going off with Mind Splice. So I was in it, digs you to your time walks. So I was way more focused on the combo version, which personally, if you're playing a 4-mana artifact that doesn't impact the battlefield, personally, I think you have to be kind of all in on the combo. And that's how I generally approach these kinds of decks, where if they have a card that is centered around a combo piece, just building around that building block as much as possible and make that card, when you have it, that is the best card in your deck. That's kind of my philosophy.
And do you feel like the power level, you've only played 1 league, like you said, but do you feel like when you've gotten the deck going that it's felt powerful enough to be worth all the work to get it set up, or what's your gut there?
So, I've also watched Todd play a ton of this deck. all the different versions that he had. I think he had Dimir, Izzet, and Azorius. So he basically covered the entire rainbow. The one thing I noticed across all the versions is the deck is broken when it has Mind Splice Apparatus unanswered, and a little flimsy when it doesn't find it. It's like a bad control deck at that point. So maybe the answer to that question is either play more cards that dig deep, like Dig Through Time, because that card is still legal in Pioneer. So you could potentially go to something like that. Or if there was some efficient way to tutor it, but I really don't think that exists in Pioneer. But yeah, maybe some more add more consistency in terms of finding the apparatus itself. I think that's the biggest key to unlocking this one.
Yeah. All right. Makes sense. All right. So the next deck I want to ask you about, I don't even know what to call this. It's a Tyvar deck.
I was watching this today.
I saw a player that I'm a little bit familiar with. His name is Brendan, right? Brendan Candido. And he made a post that said, "Someone please break this before the Pro Tour. Also, you're welcome." This deck has 4 Satyr Wayfinder, 4 Blood Tithe Harvester, 1 Thassa's Oracle, 4 Morit of the Frost, 2 Tyvar, and then just like a lot of cards after that I'm not, I have to be honest, I looked at your deck list of this. I saw that you were playing it. There's gifts being exchanged. People are saying, let him cook. What does this deck do? What is this? I mean, how does this work?
Exclamation point combo, Dave.
Yeah. No, we don't have a combo command in the comment section down below. But the basically the combo is you're playing a card. It's called Herald Unites the Elves. So the only important text on this card is the first chapter. It's 4 mana for an enchantment saga. And the first chapter says when it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards, then return, and specifically it says return an elf or Tyvar card from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's important. We'll get to that later. The second aspect of the combo is Morit of the Frost, which is basically the only text on this card that matters is it's changeling, which means it's all creature types. It's a clone for any permanent, which includes enchantments, and it's legendary. So what you do is you play your Herald, which mills 3 cards. You get back the Morit, which clones the Herald, which then triggers the Saga again, which mills 3 cards. You get back another clone. Now, the second clone that comes into play as a Herald is legendary. So you get to legend rule, keep the other one, which goes back to the graveyard, and then the trigger on the Saga brings back the same clone. So basically that loop lets you mill your entire deck, and then on the last activation of the card, the enchantment, the Saga, because it says you can return a Tyvar card, you get back Tyvar Jubilant Brawler, which then the Tyvar Jubilant Brawler -2 brings back Thassa's Oracle. And you have no deck, so you win with Thassa's Oracle.
Yeah, so I was watching you play this today on stream, and I feel like the setup looked a little bumpy.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly.
The setup looks bumpy.
Okay, so this is meme deck? This is meme.deck? Like, this is just for funds, or... I think so. I want it to be good because, in my heart of hearts, I love goofy, wacky, stupid combo decks like this, but it went pretty rough. It was pretty rough.
What's the roughest part, do you think? Like, is it just like all the pieces coming together, or like people can disrupt you with graveyard hate, or all the above?
So one thing that I realized, I thought at first that this deck was actually kind of trying to dodge a lot of the common played hate cards. And then I realized that the combo doesn't beat Pithing Needle or Besieger, because they can needle your Tyvar and they can Besieger your Saga midway through the combo. And that's when I was like, yeah, this is probably not the best idea.
I mean, there's something there. I mean, there is a combo, but
there is, yeah.
The combo exists. Just how consistent. It's like what for combos is always like what? How consistently can you do it, and how easily can you be disrupted? I feel like, and how quickly can you go off?
But what I'm getting from this though is we shouldn't expect there to be a run on Morit of the Frost at the convention center during the beginning of the Pro Tour. Like, this is probably not going to come up on the floor.
Maybe round 1.
I bought mine for just in case.
Fair enough. Maybe you can make a killing on him from when Gabe Nassif really needs him the day before. He's walking around going, I need Morit of the Frost. All right, another Tyvar deck that I thought, wanted to check in on is Vannifar combo with Tyvar.
Oh, you said the magic
words. We all know
words.
about the chain. Yep, saying it all, putting it together, Vannifar. I have trophied with this deck in Modern before. I'm just going to say it's been a long time, many years. But, I love Vannifar, so I just wanted to see has there been any movement here? Do we think that this is a possible deck, or is this kind of just another creature combo deck that probably doesn't quite have the resilience for Pioneer?
Well, Dave, I have some good news for you because I uploaded a video with this deck, I think a couple of days ago, and this was out of all of the decks that I played with Tyvar, this was by far my favorite one. It impressed me the most for sure, because for those of you who don't know, the Vanifar combo is essentially if you have Vanifar and a 1-drop, there's a convoluted loop where you put a bunch of extraction specials onto the battlefield, give them haste, and attack your opponent. But the most important part about Tyvar, specifically with Vanifar, is giving it haste. And that, because a lot of times with Vanifar, as I'm sure you're well aware, you have to just play it and cross your fingers. But with now, if you get to curve, say, Tyvar, untap a blocker, be able to protect it, then you're just off to the races next turn. So this one definitely impressed me the most. And I don't even think the list that I played was particularly good. I didn't have a lot of additional tutor targets. Fauna Shaman also, as good as Fauna Shaman was giving haste with Tyvar and being able to, the untap really never came up. I thought it, in my head, I thought it would come up where you untap you activate Fauna Shaman, untap it, activate it again. But that was more cute than anything else. But yeah, I think with some refinement, I think that Vanifar combo, that would be, if you want me to pick a sleeper pick out of all these decks and all the brews that I've made, my sleeper pick for the PT might be Vanifar.
Fascinating. Not the answer I was expecting. I was very much expecting people are going to say, hey, we're catting it up, just especially with all the other people I've seen pick it up this over the last weekend just to try out. But that would be cool and interesting to see a kind of creature birthing pod-esque combo happen at a pro tour in the year of our Lord 2023.
If Vanifar wins the PT, Dave, what are you going to do?
Tattoos, bro. Tattoos, 100%. I got a full empty back that I can fit a ooze elf wizard or whatever creature type Vanifar is.
Oh yeah, she is an ooze thing, right? Like a slime.
I think it is ooze elf advisor or some. I don't know. It's some Ravnica stuff. That's fascinating.
I always get all my advice from ooze elf wizards.
Well, I'm definitely going to give this a try on Magic Online this week just for fun. Then, is there anything else on your mind that you think people should have on their radar as far as brews you've tried or things you've seen around that might have the power to break through?
Looking at the other 4 that you put in the notes here, we got Elves, Hellraiser, Vat Reanimator, and Contaminator Scales. The Hellraiser and Vat Reanimator decks, we'll forget about those. Those didn't go so well. Okay. We talked a little bit about Elves. I think Tyvar is somewhat powerful in that deck, but the curve, you can't. So Tyvar is powerful with Circle of Dreams Druid, but it's also directly not, because it makes you play a lot more 3-drops, and you're more reliant on your Llanowar elves in those games where they push your elf and your hand's full of 3s. You can't win those games. So you need to build your deck a little bit leaner to play around Fatal Push and have more 2-drops. And then Contaminator Scales is actually something I did play on towards the end of the 24-hour stream, which I think I maybe played it in hour 20, so I probably played absolute crap. But that deck was somewhat powerful. I've actually seen Bloated Contaminator specifically pop up in some of the mono green devotion decks as the additional 3-drop of choice over Lovestruck Beast. And specifically in Scales, it was also very, very powerful. Just being able to 4/4 trample, proliferate on hit trigger is just a lot of stats and a lot of numbers. So I was pretty impressed with that.
Awesome. All right, so we're running out of time here, as we usually do. We're not going to get to Modern, unfortunately. We may even cut any mention of Modern out of the final edit of this.
What about Modern? There's no Modern. We're a Pioneer podcast.
But as a last, Pioneer podcast now. As a last fun thing, can we all try to call a top 4 decks that we think are going to be in the top 4 of this tournament? You can say 2 of a deck or whatever. I'm going to go first. Here's what I'm going to say.
Okay.
I'm going to call 2 Rakdos. I'm going to call.
You came prepared, I see.
No, I didn't come prepared. I'm going to say 1 blue-white control, 2 Rakdos, and somehow a mono blue spirits. That's what's going to be the top 4.
You're just hoping for the last one?
I mean, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
I'm going to play it somewhat safe. I'll say a Rakdos midrange, a Lotus Field, some Azorius-based control deck, and then maybe 1 rogue, a enigmatic deck, or a weird Gruul aggressive thing. Devin.
Is it time for me?
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, what do you think?
All right. I'm gonna put myself out there, right? On a limb, okay? 1 Rakdos Midrange, 1 Enigmatic Fires, 1 Gruul Vehicles, and I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna say 1 copy of Vannifar Combo.
Whoa.
Wow.
I'm going
So
for it.
three for 4 the same, and then you're going real rogue.
I feel like Devon is just playing to the crowd here.
I mean, that's fine.
He's like let's give Dave a little something to be happy with after the recording
if you're
today.
75% correct, then that's really good. And then you can be wrong
Yeah.
about the Vannifar combo.
Yeah. I love it though. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, fun times talking about Pioneer. I'm honestly pretty excited to see what happens with the format. This is the first time we've seen it on this big a stage. I mean, I know people came prepared. They prepared with their teams for the regional championships and things like that. But the Pro Tour, we do know is on a different level. We have different level of attention being paid to it. We have new cards. We have new strategies that are potentials with those cards. So I'm going to have my eyes on the screen as much as possible. Devon, for people to have their eyes on your screen that you are featured on as much as possible, when are you streaming? Where can people find you? What type of content are you making? All that good stuff.
So with the new schedule, the full-time schedule, I'm trying to stick towards Monday through Thursday, 2 to 9 p.m. Eastern, and then Friday, 12 to 5 p.m. Eastern, and then Saturday, 11 a.m. start time till whenever I decide to O2 drop from all the challenges. And you can find me at twitch.tv/Doomwake, youtube.com/Doomwake, Twitter, Doomwake, and the Doomwake is d00mwake.
Awesome. Very glad to have you on for your first episode. I'm sure we'll have you back on in the future. We appreciate you spending your time
If you'll
with
have
us.
us.
Yes. Appreciate you spending 2 hours
if
with
you have
us.
me.
I knew this one was going to be long, and it ended up being our longest one in a while. So appreciate you being on and sticking with us. But that does wrap this week's show up. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the pod. You get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. If you use Apple Podcasts, think about leaving us a rating or review. Helps people find us, helps us feel good about ourselves there. If you want to submit a question to us, reach out to us, tweet us at The Dive Down or email thedivedown@gmail.com. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown or check out our store at thedivedown.com/store. Of course, Mana Traders, sign up for them using promo code TheDiveDown10, all one word, for 10% off your first 2 months of running Magic Online. And then, of course, our relationship with Barrister and Man, use code TheDiveDown23 for 15% off your first order there. And Nerd Rage Gaming, you can save 8% on your order with code DIVE8. As always, thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, get out there and watch Doomwake stream!